We are doing a self-care session today. Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to the first Sunday self-care session on Instagram Live and also being filmed for YouTube. So we'll see how that goes, if I can manage to get this edited appropriately to put up for reviewing or sharing. So you should be able to access this later. If you come on late, you should be able to, or later than right now, you should be able to see this. Thank you so much for joining. I'm excited to dive in. We'll be here for about 20 minutes. I'll do a little bit of sharing, but I'm also gonna ask real-time questions that if you want to share or answer, you can do that during this live, and I'll be watching the comments for any input and thoughts. And then we're also going to do some other prompts, little tiny, not really tiny, but some questions to think about, some journaling prompts if journaling is your form of introspection and self-analysis. And then, of course, these are things that you can take away with you to think about later, to do some deeper thinking on, deeper diving on. So I'm a yoga teacher, first and foremost, and so we're going to start with an intention. So if there is an intention that you're bringing to watching this session, then please feel free to share it, or if you haven't thought about that, you can take some time to name it. If nothing comes to mind, don't worry about it. You can steal mine. So my intentions for today, mostly, first and foremost, my intention is connection. I want to foster a space where we can connect with each other, where I can connect with my students, with those of you who are following me on Instagram, or for people who are just finding me and are thinking a lot about self-care. This is something that's important to me, and I want to connect with other people on that. So that's one of my intentions, my main one. And then I've got a lot. I want to grow in compassion. I want to foster a space where compassion is a given, where you will find that when you come. And I also want us to feel freer in ourselves. I want us to feel more grounded in ourselves. And I also want to talk about, in the space of self-care, removing ourselves from the buzzwords, allowing for a place where self-care becomes more about who we are and what we really need. So, little stuff, basic, nothing really intense. So those are my intentions. Feel free to share yours. If you have something different, please make sure that you keep your own intentions foremost in your mind, that you are being true to yourself. And, but again, if you like my intentions, you can focus on those too. So the other thing I want to talk about as we get started is why I'm doing this. We have been in the midst of a quarantine, and my family and I, so me and my husband and my infant son, three of us, we started self-quarantining in the beginning of March, mid-March. And so it's been a while, and self-care is something that I like to practice, that I like to kind of like pick and choose of things that make me feel good. I'm a Taurus, I'm an earth sign, I very much feel connected to my physicality and want to feel good in my body. And so, yoga and exercise and yummy food and baths, all these things are very important to me. And so that hasn't changed. In fact, it's actually increased. The need for self-care has increased. And with that, as I'm looking for things to kind of help my mental health or help my physical health or help my husband or my son, I have honestly been really overwhelmed by the influx of language around self-care, the listicles about moisturizer, and the memes of like, here's the thing to do, and here's the thing to do, and here's the thing to do. And I felt like too much noise and too many like, oh, well, this is a good formula for self-care, or this is a good process for self-care. And I had this moment where I thought, you know what? I want to start talking about self-care as very individualized thing that we do that's not grounded in our skin type or the money we have in our bank account, but more connected to who we are as individuals and who we are as people, and the ways that we're connected to other individuals, connected to our world at large. So with that, I've been asking some questions on Instagram about your own self-care practices to kind of learn what other people are thinking about, and it really seems like we're tired and we're overwhelmed. So I think I'm not alone in that. And I got responses to things that people are interested around self-care, finding ways to stop overthinking, finding ways to understand ourselves better, our feelings better, finding ways to unplug. And so I was like, you know what? Yes, this is reaffirming the things that I am feeling too. I need to separate from the noise. I want to understand what I'm feeling better. I want to stop being in my brain all the time, but at the same time, like, know what's going on with me and be able to name it. So that's what we're going to start on first. Today is for knowing ourselves. And so, I think a lot of the feedback that I was getting points to that. Selfishly, that was my impetus for this as well. So we're going to focus on knowing ourselves as people and making that the foundation of our self-care practice, whatever that looks like. So what I am not going to do today is characterize self-care. I'm not going to name what it is. I'm not going to say self-care is this. Self-care looks like this. I think that we should be able to do that for ourselves as individuals. So I'm going to aim to not, if you catch me, you should like wink at me or something and tell me you're doing it. You're characterizing self-care, and that's my job for myself. Okay? So hold me accountable. Instead, we're going to work on connecting to ourselves, which is a big job. And I don't think that we're going to be able to do it all here in this session in 20 minutes. Look, I'm already 9 minutes in, right? So instead, we're going to talk about ways that are really helpful to do that, really fundamental things about knowing who we are as individuals. So to start, our very first prompt is to do like a self-inventory. Where am I physically? What is the primary thought in my head right now? What is my main emotion right now? And we'll move on from there. So we're going to take about 10 seconds to connect to our breath, because this is also yoga. Knowing ourselves is yoga. Self-care is yoga. So go ahead and find a comfortable physical position, and then begin to connect to your breath. Breathing in and out evenly. Don't worry about if it's in through your nose or out through your nose or whatever. It should feel comfortable. It should feel easy. You should begin to feel calm through the breath. The breath is bringing peace in and releasing tension. As we breathe, you can close your eyes here, or if you journal, you can journal. If you're an artist, grab your method of art, a pen, a crayon. If you're a musician, grab your guitar, whatever it is that will help you connect with what's going on in your mind. We'll start there. What's the primary thought? What is the noise in the brain? It can be good or bad noise. You don't even have to characterize it as good or bad. It can just be whatever's happening. This is a very simple awareness practice. And next, we're going to move on to our emotions, what we're feeling. As you breathe, let go of the thing that you're thinking about. Say, thank you, brain. I know that thought might still be there, and that's okay. You hold on to it, you take care of it. We're going to move on to our hearts. What are the feelings that are happening here? It can be a lot. You might not be able to name them, and that's okay. Don't worry about that. We can work on that later. We can find some great resources for naming our emotions if we have a hard time. We can give them colors or characteristics or names, people's names. If you're just like, you know, Greg is in there. I don't know what Greg is, but he's there. Continue to breathe. And then with the next few breaths, we're going to think about what our bodies are feeling. Take notice of where you're feeling comfortable, where you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're feeling strong, feeling weak, if you're feeling pain. Maybe you feel disassociation, disembodiment. Maybe you just really feel connected to yourself. And it's okay wherever you are. Whatever the feelings are, whatever the sensations are, mostly we just want to be able to name them and connect with the body. Then with the next few breaths, ask yourself, what is it that I need in response to these things? And you might not get an answer, but if you do, take note. It's okay if you don't get an answer. It's also okay if you do get an answer. It might not be an answer you were expecting. The key here is to not judge your own answer, to not judge your response, but instead to accept it and just take note of it. Okay, I'm going to recognize the need that I hear. Don't worry too much about checking it or second guessing it. Just practice listening to that first organic, authentic response that you get from yourself and allowing it for a little bit. Okay, so we have finished that first prompt, that self-inventory. And so the next thing that I would like to do that I think is really fundamental to our self-care practice that kind of gets overlooked is taking note of what we value as individuals. My experience, my background is in values-heavy work, identifying what our values are as individuals and working to align our decisions and our behaviors across the board in our lives with those values. And I think that this can totally transform our self-care practice. So for an example, I really value I value a lot of things, and honestly, it kind of changes. But and it does change. I think this is a practice. Our values inventory is something that we should actually be checking in on. I mean, if I was like really living my best life, I'd probably be doing it quarterly, but I'm not. I'm doing it about yearly. And but one of the things that's always there is excellence, and another one that's always there is compassion. And so a large part of my self-care practice is learning to dismantle my perfectionism and my judgment towards myself and practicing compassion towards myself. So a lot of that is self-talk. A lot of that looks like breathing, allowing myself to just kind of calm down, be where I am, slow down, and reassess. And then another part of my self-care practice is consistency, because excellence requires consistency. So those are really broad and overreaching, but it helps me to narrow down what I'm going to say yes to in my self-care practice and what I'm going to say no to. Because as we know, every yes requires at least like so many no's, right? Just if you say yes to something, you have to say no to a lot more other things. So our second prompt here is to start to think about our values. If you can start to name them, please share. I'd love to hear what other people's value sets are. I have all these written down somewhere and I should have pulled them out. Okay, some big ones for me: compassion, excellence. I also really, really, really value intelligence. If I see something that's smartly written or smartly said or someone acting real smart, I love seeing intelligence infused in the way that we behave as humans, both on a micro and a macro level. So in yoga, like the smarter, more effective, efficient sequence, the more I'm just like, yes, I love it. I want something that is like really, really efficient and like works smart together. So those are a couple examples of values. And values, to do a little bit of values work, they are things that apply to the whole of our lives. So if you can look at each scenario in which you operate and the things that you always want to see or you're disappointed if it's not there, across the board, right? So in your relationships, in your work, in your family life, in your home life, in your finances, in your health, in your self-care, in your exercise, like across all of those areas, your values should pretty much stay the same. Yeah, so those values, you'll see them, you'll notice them in your reactions to things, in your acceptance of things or your frustrations. Interesting work that happens is when we start to analyze our values against our behaviors and our decision making, and that is where we find a lot of frustration because our values are sometimes subconscious and our behaviors are also sometimes subconscious, even though we don't think they are, but they are. And so if you have two subconscious things going on at the same time, they're sometimes you're going to find misalignment. And that's where we find a lot of disappointment and frustration, sadness, anger, feeling of lack of fulfillment. And so I think if we can look at the values that we have as people, the values that we are truly carrying, whether or not we know it, and then start to look at our self-care practices, the things that we have accepted, that we need or we really, really want, the things that we're spending our money on for our self-care, the things that we're spending our time on for our self-care. If we can align those two things, then wow, I mean, powerful, so powerful. So I've talked a lot. I hope during this time, as I've been talking, you've been able to ponder a little bit about your values. Maybe you're like, whoa, I've never thought about this before, or this is like a huge question that you like really need to give me some time on. So take the question of values away with you. Let that be a journal prompt. Let that be like a creative challenge if you want to think about that in your art or in your whatever your downtime, like happy space activity is. While you're taking a bath, while you're making dinner, let this kind of ruminate in your mind. You don't have to like have an answer and move forward, but let this be something that develops in your life overall. I mean, I think this is a huge self-care practice to be able to name our values. Okay, so that's prompt number 2. The third prompt I want to bring up, which so you guys know I cannot talk about like self-awareness without bringing up Jess G, Jen. She's like a huge inspiration to me, and she said to me a great meditation tool is when you walk through a threshold, and she got this from someone else, but I heard this from her. When you walk through a threshold, say to yourself, I am here. And I think that's so powerful. I've tried to do it. I'm really bad at it. It's so hard to remember to do. But I also think this is a great practice, like for ourselves in general in our life. And so the third prompt that I want to do today is, what is my chapter? If you're to think of yourself as the main character of a story or a novel, which you are, where in your story arc are you? And even if you don't know the answer to that question, because which of us really know what our arc looks like overall, right? Unless we're like psychic. Um, Being able to name, like, if this was the title of my chapter, this would be the title of my chapter. If we can do that for ourselves and know, like, hey, guess what? I'm in a really hard spot. Like, if I think about, like, 5 years ago, like 5 years ago was amazing. I was like rocking it and I didn't even realize, but right now I feel like it really sucks. Being able to name your chapter, maybe your chapter is like really, really great, but being able to name for yourself what you're going through, really how you feel about what you're going through, and in the larger picture of what your life has been, and then thinking about, like, hey, you know what, I want to be in this space in the future, like this chapter, I want it to connect me to that chapter. That can be so powerful in being able to name what the things are that we need for ourselves for that development, for that story development in our own lives. We tell ourselves stories all the time, and I'm not an expert on this, but we all know this to be true, that we always have a narrative that we are providing to ourselves, that we are crafting every single day when we wake up. And so if we're able to grab hold of that story, grab hold of that narrative, and look at it and analyze it and identify the ways in which we want it to stay the same and the ways that we want it to change, we can build a self-care practice that really does those things for us, in line with our values. So if you know what your chapter is, you're like, oh, girl, I know what it is. It's this right here. Please share. If you don't, that's fine. I honestly don't even know if I do. I mean, I think I kind of do. I feel like this is like postpartum 2.0. Quarantine is it's like it's very similar levels of anxiety and feeling isolated and out of control and unprepared. Like, same as when my son was 2 months old. Like, very similar feelings. So yeah, it's like postpartum 2.0, but without the child. I feel like the child is going to be our survival, like humankind survival in general. If we can get like all of us to the end of this, that is actually how I feel. If my community like makes it to vaccination. Oh gosh. All right. Anyways, yeah, so that's the name of my chapter. And so, for me, my response to that in terms of my self care practice is maybe we need to reassess what you can control, who you're mothering. Uh, we can remove some of the anxiety out of that little brain of yours, Victoria. So that's prompt number 3. So to go over this again, prompt number 1 is our self inventory. Prompt number 2 is our values, understanding what our values are as individuals. And then prompt number 3 is, what is my chapter? Where am I? And where do I want to go? And what do I want my life to look like from here? And so these are big questions, but they're also everyday questions. So check in with yourself. I encourage you to do that in some way, at least once a day. Build it, habit building. It's best when we tack on new habits to existing habits. So if it's brushing your teeth and you just want to start saying, okay, what are my thoughts? What are my feelings? What's my body doing? How's my body feeling? Prompt number 2, values. Just, when you're picking your movie on Netflix, does this align with my values? Not that it needs to, but, start to ask, like, how am I making my decisions? What is consistent? What's inconsistent with what I want to be consistent? These types of things. Again, tack that onto existing habits. And then with where you're at in your life, that is also going to shift, but that tends to be, that takes more introspection, right? What has my life been? What is my life right now? And what do I want it to be? And so that is definitely deeper work, and that's longer term work too. But I do think it's important for when we're building our self-care practice. So, guys, that's what I've got for today. I hope this was helpful to you. I hope it wasn't more noise. I don't want to create more noise in your life. I want us to really take good care of ourselves, especially at this time. I want us to model good self-care for the people around us, for our children, for our friends, for our spouses. I think we do need to do this work as individuals. It's not something we can read a BuzzFeed article or, even a Well and Good article and come away with like the exact formula, recipe, process for what is going to make our life, sparkling, clean, and wonderful. It does take individual work and thought. I thank you guys so much for joining me. And if you're watching later, shoot me a DM. I think you can comment on Live's post the fact, and it just goes as a DM. I don't know. I was born in the very late 80s, and so I'm not good at technology. Not to be ageist. That's just my experience. I am not great at technology. Okay, guys, have a wonderful day, and I will see you next Sunday for session 2. And I was going to wait till after this one to name the next one so that I made sure it rolled smoothly. I wanted it to evolve kind of organically. So look for that content this week and have a wonderful day.